A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Imagine you are sitting in a darkened room in central Israel. The air is cool, filtered, and smells faintly of ozone and industrial cleaning supplies. Before you is a screen displaying a map of the Eastern Mediterranean, but it is not a map you would recognize from a travel brochure. It is a mathematical grid, a three-dimensional battle space where the stakes are quite literally existential. Somewhere over the horizon, 1,000 miles away, a rocket engine has just ignited. In less than 10 minutes, a piece of metal the size of a telephone pole will be re-entering the atmosphere at several kilometers per second. You have a handful of seconds to decide if the computer is right, if the trajectory is true, and if you should authorize the launch of a multi-million-dollar interceptor. This is the reality of the aero missile defense system, and today, we are going deep into the human-machine architecture that makes it possible.
Herman Poppleberry here, and I have to say, this topic hits close to home for us living here in Jerusalem. Usually, our housemate Daniel sends us a prompt to chew on, but today we actually decided to take the reins ourselves. We wanted to look at something that is often discussed in terms of hardware and geopolitics, but rarely in terms of the actual people, the engineers, the operators, and the technicians who keep the shield held high. We've talked about the logistics of missile defense back in episode 744, but today is about the cognitive and professional infrastructure.
It is a fascinating pivot because when people see those videos of an interception in space, they see a flash of light and they think of it as a finished product. But the Arrow is not just a missile, it is a distributed cognitive system. It is thousands of miles of sensor data, decades of elite engineering, and a very specific type of human psychology. We are going to break down the developer profile, the operational reality of the batteries, and that high-stakes human-artificial intelligence interface.
Let us start with the architecture itself. When we talk about Arrow, we are actually talking about a family of systems, Arrow 2 and Arrow 3. For those who might not be up to speed on the technical distinction, Arrow 2 is endo-atmospheric. It catches threats as they are coming back down into the air. Arrow 3, however, is the high-altitude specialist. It intercepts targets in the exosphere, literally in the vacuum of outer space.
And that distinction is crucial for the human-in-the-loop paradox we are exploring today. In the atmosphere, you have air resistance, weather, and predictable physics. In space, everything changes. The timelines are compressed, but the distances are vast. This creates a unique pressure on the human element. We often hear that these systems are autonomous, but that is a bit of a misnomer. They are highly automated, yes, but the human is the final arbiter of the engagement rules.
It is that tension between the machine's speed and the human's judgment. We saw this in action during the massive escalations over the last few years. The system can track dozens of targets, but it is a human who has to look at the screen and say, yes, that is a ballistic missile headed for a city, not a satellite or a piece of space junk. This brings us to the people who actually build this logic.
Let us talk about the developers, Korn. When you look at the Israel Aerospace Industries, or IAAI, which is the primary contractor for the Arrow, you are not just looking at a standard defense company. You are looking at the culmination of a very specific Israeli pipeline called the Talpiot program. Now, for those who do not know, Talpiot is arguably the most elite academic and military program in the Israel Defense Forces. They take the top 1% of the top 1% kids who are not just good at math, but who can synthesize physics, computer science, and leadership under extreme pressure.
I remember reading about the Talpiot curriculum. It is not just sitting in a lecture hall. These students are sent to different units, paratroopers, tanks, Navy, to understand the ground-level reality of the military before they ever sit down to design a radar algorithm. The idea is that you cannot build an effective defense system if you do not understand the chaos of the battlefield.
Right, and it is important to clarify a misconception here. People often ask, do you have to be a certifiable genius to build a system like Arrow? The answer is probably yes, but not in the way people think. It is not just about having a high IQ. It is about a specific discipline called systems architecture. You could be the world's greatest coder, but if you do not understand the physics of a solid fuel motor burning in the vacuum of space, your code is useless. If you are a brilliant aerospace engineer, but you do not understand how signal processing handles radar clutter, the missile will never find its target.
The expertise required is incredibly multidisciplinary. You need specialists in control theory, the math of how you steer a projectile that is moving at Mach 9. You need materials scientists who can develop nose cones that do not melt or warp when they hit the atmosphere at hypersonic speeds. And perhaps most importantly today, you need software developers who specialize in resilient systems. We are talking about code that cannot fail, cannot lag, and must be able to operate in a contested electromagnetic environment where the enemy is actively trying to jam your sensors.
Let us dig into the radar for a second, because that is the eyes of the system. The Green Pine Radar, or the ELM 2080, is an active electronically scanned array, or AESA. This is not your grandfather's rotating radar dish. It is a massive, stationary face made of thousands of tiny transmit-receive modules. It can steer its beam at the speed of electricity. The developers who work on this have to be masters of signal processing. They have to write algorithms that can distinguish a warhead from a piece of a booster rocket that has broken off, all while the target is traveling at several kilometers per second.
And that leads to the concept of sensor fusion. The Aero system does not just rely on its own radar. It is pulling data from the Great Pine Radar, from U.S. satellite systems, and from other sensors across the region. The developers have to figure out how to merge all that data into a single, coherent picture. If one radar says the target is at point A, and another says it is at point B, the software has to decide which one to trust in a fraction of a second.
I was reading about the transition from Aero 2 to Aero 3, and that really highlights the engineering shift. Aero 2 used a blast fragmentation warhead. You just had to get close enough and explode. But Aero 3, that uses a hit-to-kill mechanism. As we discussed in episode 705, hit-to-kill is like trying to hit a bullet with another bullet while you are both riding on different trains in the dark. There is no explosive warhead. The sheer kinetic energy of the impact. The mass times the velocity squared is what destroys the target.
To do that, the developers had to move away from traditional aerodynamic fins. In space, there is no air for fins to push against, so they designed the Divert and Attitude Control System, or DACS. These are tiny thrusters on the kill vehicle that fire in microbursts to nudge the interceptor into the path of the incoming missile. The level of precision required in the software to time those bursts is mind-boggling. We're talking about millisecond accuracy while traveling at kilometers per second. If the timing is off by a hair, you miss by a mile.
It makes me wonder about the psychological profile of the people writing that code. Imagine the pressure of knowing that a single bug, a single misplaced semicolon in a line of guidance logic could mean the difference between a successful intercept and a ballistic missile hitting a population center. That is not just engineering, that is high-stakes stewardship. These developers are essentially the architects of a national insurance policy.
It really is. And that leads us directly into the operational side. Who are the people actually sitting in the seats when the sirens go off? A single arrow battery is not just a bunch of guys in a field. It is a complex unit consisting of the radar system, the fire control center, and the launchers themselves. Usually you are looking at a crew of dozens of personnel to keep a battery fully operational around the clock, though the actual engagement is handled by a much smaller team in the fire control center.
The roles are very specific. You have the radar operators who manage the Green Pine. They are trained to look at the raw data and distinguish between a legitimate threat, a decoy, and atmospheric noise. Then you have the fire control officers, who are the ones actually managing the engagement logic. They are looking at the Citron tree system, which is the battle management software.
Let us talk about the Citron tree interface for a minute. It is not like a video game. It is a high-density information display. It shows the predicted trajectory of the incoming threat, the calculated impact point, and the footprint of the defense. The system presents the operator with a probability of intercept. It might say, if we launch now, we have a 92% chance of success. The operator has to decide if that is good enough, or if they should wait for a better track, knowing that every second they wait, the window of opportunity shrinks.
The training for these roles is intense. We are talking about months of simulator work before they even get close to a live system. And here is the interesting thing about the Israeli model, which we touched on in episode 585. Many of these operators are very young. We are talking about 18, 19, and 20-year-olds. But they are backed by a rigorous system of checklists and automated decision support. The goal is to find that Goldilocks zone of training, where the human is not so reliant on the AI that they become complacent, but they are also not so overwhelmed by data that they freeze up.
That Goldilocks zone is a great way to put it. If the system is too automated, the operator becomes a spectator. They lose their situational awareness. This is a known problem in aviation called automation bias. If the computer says everything is fine, the human tends to believe it, even if their gut or other instruments say otherwise. In the aero system, they combat this by constantly running shadow drills where the operators have to solve problems that the AI might have missed.
That human-AI interface is really the heart of the matter. People have this image of a fully autonomous system where a computer just does everything. And while the aero system can calculate trajectories and launch windows much faster than a human ever could, the human remains the final arbiter. In the Citron tree interface, the operator has to validate that the target is indeed a threat and that the engagement rules are being followed.
There is a concept often called the dead man switch in modern defense. During certain phases of a high-speed ballistic missile flight, the timeline is so compressed that the system is essentially on autopilot, but the human has an override capability. If the radar suddenly realizes that the target is actually a piece of space debris or a friendly aircraft that strayed into the zone, unlikely as that is for a ballistic trajectory, the human has to be able to abort.
But Korn, what about the psychological burden? You and I have lived through enough sirens to know the tension. But for the operator, they are seeing the threat before the sirens even start. They are seeing the launch in real time via satellite links and long-range radar. They have to maintain a level of cool-headedness that is frankly superhuman. If they hesitate, the window closes. If they are too aggressive, they might waste an interceptor on a missile that was going to fall in the sea anyway.
That is where the AI is actually a huge help. It filters out the noise. It tells the operator, this missile is headed for Tel Aviv, but this other one is going to hit an open field in the Negev. The human skill then becomes about managing resources. You only have a certain number of interceptors in the tubes. If you have 20 incoming missiles and only 15 interceptors ready to fire in that specific window, you have to make the terrible calculated choice of which ones to prioritize. That is a heavy, heavy burden for a young officer.
It really highlights the shift from being an operator to being a system supervisor. In the old days of anti-aircraft guns, you were aiming a weapon. Now, you are managing a complex logic gate. You are supervising an algorithm that is doing the heavy lifting. And that brings up the maintenance side of things, which I think is the most underrated part of the whole shield.
Oh, absolutely. Everyone loves the interceptors, but nobody talks about the guys who have to crawl inside the silos or check the cooling systems on the radar in the middle of a desert heat wave. The aero missiles use solid fuel motors. Solid fuel is great because it is always ready to go. You do not have to fuel it up right before launch like a liquid propellant rocket. But solid fuel is also sensitive to temperature cycles and vibrations.
Right, and we're talking about the Negev desert. You have extreme heat during the day and cold at night. You have dust and sand that can get into everything. The maintenance crews have to ensure that the sensitive electronics, the seekers, and the thrusters are in a state of cold readiness. This requires a level of technical expertise that is equivalent to a high-end aerospace technician. These are people who are constantly running diagnostic logs, checking for micro-fissures in the fuel grain, and ensuring that the communication links between the battery and the National Command Center are 100% reliable.
Think about the cold readiness challenge. These missiles might sit in their canisters for years, but they have to work perfectly in a window of about 60 seconds. The electronics have to wake up, the gyroscopes have to spin up to speed, and the thermal batteries have to activate instantly. The technicians are responsible for that. Zero-fail reliability. If a single connector has corroded because of the desert salt air, the whole mission fails.
It is a thankless job in many ways. If you do your job perfectly, nothing happens. The missile sits in the tube for years and then, in the 1 minute it is needed, it works. If it fails, everyone knows. The pressure on the maintenance and logistics side is just as high as it is on the operational side, but without any of the glory. They are the ones ensuring that the billion-dollar math we talked about in episode 744 actually adds up when it counts.
I want to go back to the vetting process for a moment. How do you find these people? How do you ensure that the people with their hands on the literal keys to the kingdom are reliable? In Israel, the vetting pipeline starts long before military service. The intelligence and defense communities are looking at high school records, looking at extracurriculars, and conducting deep psychological evaluations.
It is a very thorough process. For the high-level clearances required to work on the Arrow's source code or its electronic warfare suites, the vetting is invasive. They look at your family, your friends, your financial history, and your digital footprint. But there is also a cultural element. Because Israel is a small country, there is a degree of social vetting that happens naturally. Everyone knows someone who knows someone.
That creates what I call the vetting paradox. You need a high security workforce to protect the secrets of the system, but you also need a culture of innovation where people feel free to challenge existing ideas. If you make the environment too rigid and secretive, you might stifle the very genius you need to stay ahead of the enemy's evolving threats. The IDF and the defense industries seem to have found a way to balance that. They have these very flat hierarchies, where a 22-year-old engineer can tell a colonel that the radar logic is wrong, and the colonel will actually listen.
That is a very American-Israeli trait, actually. That willingness to argue based on data rather than rank. It is probably why the US and Israel have such a tight handshake on missile defense, as we discussed in episode 884. We share the data and the development because both cultures value that kind of meritocratic friction. The US provides significant funding and co-development through Boeing, but the operational edge often comes from this Israeli culture of chutzpah in engineering.
So, let us talk about the unsung heroes for a second. We have mentioned the developers and the operators, but think about the people who manage the power grids for the radar sites. Think about the people who handle the cybersecurity for the internal networks. The Arrow system is a massive target for cyber attacks. Every second of every day, there are state actors trying to probe the Citron tree network for vulnerabilities. The people defending those networks are just as much a part of the missile defense shield as the interceptor itself.
And they will never get a medal that they can talk about in public. Their names will never be in the newspaper. They go to work in nondescript buildings, they do their shift, and they come home to their families and cannot say a word about what they did that day. There is a quiet heroism in that. It is a form of service that requires a complete set-aside of the ego.
It is interesting to think about how this changes the concept of a soldier. In the past, a soldier was someone on the front lines with a rifle. Today, a soldier might be someone in a clean room with a soldering iron, or someone in a server room looking at packet headers. But the impact of their work is arguably even greater. One technician's mistake in a maintenance bay could lead to a catastrophic failure of the shield during a crisis.
This brings us to the future of the system. We are already seeing the development of the Arrow 4, and there is constant talk about integrating directed energy, or lasers, into the mix. This will change the human-machine architecture even further. With lasers, the engagement timelines become even shorter, literally the speed of light. The role of the human will move even further into the realm of pre-authorization and engagement rules rather than real-time control.
You know, it reminds me of the physics of interception we talked about in episode 936. When you are dealing with such high velocities, the debris from an intercept still has to go somewhere. Part of the human operator's job is also predicting where that debris will fall. They have to choose an intercept point that minimizes the risk to people on the ground from the falling fragments of the destroyed missile. It is a constant game of three-dimensional chess played at thousands of miles per hour.
It is a move toward what I call the algorithmic commander. The human sets the parameters. If X happens, do Y, and then the system executes at a speed that is beyond human biological capacity. The skill of the future operator will be in their ability to audit the AI's logic in real time, to spot when the machine is being fooled by something the human intuition recognizes as an anomaly.
That is a great point. AI is great at patterns, but it can be spoofed by things it has never seen before. A human operator might look at a radar return and say, "That does not look like a missile tumbling. That looks like a decoy designed to look like a tumbling missile." That gut feeling is actually the result of thousands of hours of training and a biological neural network that is still, in many ways, superior to the silicon ones we build.
This has been a deep dive into a world that most people only see in short, grainy clips on the news. But the reality is a masterpiece of human organization and technical brilliance. From the Talpiot geniuses who dream up the math to the 18-year-old who has to keep their cool when the screen turns red, it is a testament to what people can achieve when the stakes are as high as they can possibly be.
And it is a reminder that even in an age of AI and automation, the human element is not being replaced. It is being refined. We are moving toward a partnership where the machine handles the speed and the human handles the morality and the judgment. That is a powerful combination, but it is also a fragile one that requires constant care, maintenance, and vetting.
If you found this deep dive into the architecture of the Arrow system interesting, you should definitely check out our archive at myweirdprompts.com. We have covered the physics of the shield in episode 705 and the logistical challenges in episode 744. There is a lot of history there that helps put today's discussion in context.
And hey, if you're enjoying the show, we would really appreciate it if you could leave us a review on Spotify or whatever podcast app you are using. It actually helps a lot in getting the word out and reaching new listeners who might be interested in these kinds of deep technical explorations.
We really do appreciate the support. It keeps us digging into these complex topics. We will be back next time with another deep dive. This has been My Weird Prompts.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We will talk to you soon. Until then, keep asking the weird questions.
This has been a production of the Poppleberry Brothers, coming to you from Jerusalem. You can find all our episodes and the RSS feed at myweirdprompts.com.
See you in the next one.
One more thing before we go. I was thinking about that technician we mentioned, the one in the Negev. Imagine the level of focus required to calibrate a sensor when you know that a fraction of a millimeter of misalignment could cause a miss. It really is a culture of precision that permeates the entire country.
It has to be. In a place this small, there is no room for error. That is why the vetting and the training are so rigorous. It is a national effort disguised as a military project.
Well said. All right, we are signing off for real this time.
Goodbye, everyone.
Take care.
And remember, the shield is only as strong as the people behind it.
Bye for now.
Bye.
This has been episode 982 of My Weird Prompts.
Glad we could dive into this one ourselves today.
Me too. It was a good change of pace.
Definitely. Catch you later.
Catch you later.
All right. I think we are clear.
Good talk, Herman.
You too, Corn.
Let us go see if Daniel has any coffee left.
Good luck with that. He has been on a caffeine kick all morning.
Worth a shot. See ya.
See ya.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth.